The winter evening had settled into the city like a held breath, quiet but heavy, the kind of cold that crept through seams and settled in the bones. Streetlights flickered on one by one, their yellow glow reflecting on damp pavement. People hurried past storefronts, collars raised, minds already home. At the end of a narrow lane stood an old apartment building with a single wooden door at its entrance, scarred by years of weather and use. Most residents barely noticed it anymore, but on that evening, the door would become something more than an entrance. It would become a turning point. Miriam lived on the third floor of that building. She was a woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes softened by a natural gentleness. Her life had not been easy. She worked long hours as a seamstress, stitching clothes for a small factory, her fingers rough from needles and thread. She lived alone since her husband's passing, and her children had moved to another city in search of work. Yet, despite the quiet loneliness that sometimes followed her home, Miriam carried a habit she had never lost: she noticed people. That evening, as she climbed the stairs with a bag of groceries pressing into her palm, she heard a sound near the entrance. It was faint, almost lost beneath the hum of traffic outside. She paused, listening. It sounded like coughing, followed by a weak shuffle. Miriam sighed softly, torn between fatigue and concern. She had cooked, washed, worked, and all she wanted was a cup of tea and silence. Still, something tugged at her, urging her to turn back. She descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing. Near the door, she saw a man standing uncertainly in the dim light. He looked to be in his early 30s, thin to the point of fragility, his jacket far too light for the cold. His hair was uncombed, his face pale, eyes darting as if unsure whether he was allowed to be there. One hand clutched his side, the other rested against the wall for balance. Miriam hesitated. The city had taught people caution. Strangers were risks, stories waiting to turn bad. She felt the familiar fear rise, the voice that said, "Not your problem." But then the man swayed slightly, and instinct overcame doubt. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The man looked up, startled, as if he hadn't expected kindness. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Finally, he shook his head. "I just needed to sit for a moment," he said, his voice hoarse. "I won't be any trouble." Miriam studied him. His shoes were worn through at the soles, his hands trembling from cold or hunger, perhaps both. She thought of her own sons, imagined them standing somewhere unknown, vulnerable to the mercy of strangers. The thought settled her decision. "It's too cold to stand here," she said. "Come inside. At least warm yourself." The man's eyes widened. "I don't want to intrude," he said quickly. "I'll leave soon." "You're not intruding," Miriam replied, opening the door wider. "It's just warmth. Everyone deserves that." He stepped inside hesitantly, as though crossing a boundary he feared would snap shut behind him. Miriam closed the door, shutting out the wind, and led him to the small bench near the stairs. She set her grocery bag down and took off her scarf, offering it to him. "For your cough," she said. "Wrap it around your neck." He accepted it with trembling hands, gratitude flickering across his face like a fragile flame. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know how much this means." Miriam smiled softly. "Sit. I'll make some tea." She brought him up to her apartment, a modest place filled with handmade cushions, the scent of fabric and spices lingering in the air. The man stood awkwardly near the door, unsure where to place himself, as if afraid of breaking something simply by being there. "Sit," Miriam said again, more firmly this time, pointing to a chair near the small heater. As the kettle boiled, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He looked around slowly, taking in the warmth, the ordinary comfort of a lived-in home. When she handed him the tea, his hands shook so much that some spilled onto the floor. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's fine," Miriam said, handing him a cloth. "Drink slowly." As the warmth seeped into him, color returned to his face. After a while, he spoke. His name was Yusuf. He had come to the city looking for work after the factory in his hometown closed. Promises had fallen apart, savings had vanished faster than he expected, and pride had kept him from asking for help. He had been sleeping in shelters when he could, on benches when he couldn't. That day, weakness had overtaken him, and he had ducked into the building just to escape the cold. "I didn't think anyone would notice," Yusuf said quietly. "Most people don't." Miriam nodded. "It's easier not to," she said. "But that doesn't make it right." She gave him some bread and soup, watching as he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be his last. There was no pity in her gaze, only quiet respect. She didn't ask questions that would shame him, didn't offer advice he hadn't asked for. She simply listened. That night, she offered him a place to sleep on the couch. Yusuf resisted at first, insisting he didn't want to be a burden. Miriam silenced him with a look. "You are a guest," she said. "And tomorrow, we'll see what can be done." Morning came with pale sunlight and the smell of fresh tea. Yusuf woke with a sense of disbelief, half expecting the warmth to vanish like a dream. But Miriam was there, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. After eating, she helped him wash up, lending him one of her son's old jackets. Then she walked with him to a nearby clinic, insisting he see a doctor about his cough. She waited patiently while he was examined, paid for the medicine without mentioning it again. From there, she took him to a small workshop where she knew the owner, a man who sometimes needed extra hands. "He's hard-working," Miriam said simply. "He just needs a chance." The owner looked Yusuf over, then nodded. "We'll see how he does." Days turned into weeks. Yusuf worked diligently, arriving early, staying late. His health improved, his posture straightened, hope slowly replacing despair. He found a small room to rent and insisted on returning Miriam's scarf, freshly washed and folded. She waved it away. "Keep it," she said. "Winter isn't over yet." They shared tea often, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter. Yusuf began helping Miriam with errands, fixing small things around her apartment. The building's residents started to notice him too, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone familiar, someone who belonged. One evening, as they sat near the same door where they had first met, Yusuf spoke with emotion thick in his voice. "If you hadn't opened that door," he said, "I don't know where I'd be." Miriam looked at the worn wood, the simple handle, the threshold that had changed so much. "I only did what anyone should," she said. Yusuf shook his head. "No," he replied softly. "You did what compassion demands, not what convenience allows." Years later, the door would be repainted, the building renovated, the city changing as it always did. But for Yusuf and Miriam, that door would forever represent a moment when fear was set aside, when one person chose to see another not as a risk, but as a human being in need. And in that simple act, a life was restored, a loneliness eased, and a quiet truth affirmed. Sometimes, all it takes to change everything is the courage to open a door with compassion.